The innkeeper nodded, adding more wood to the fire. We fought to keep them off Arona, but we failed. You see what their influence has done to Caligo Forest over the years. He made a helpless gesture. The whole forest, Liliana said in disbelief, turning to stare at him. All the way to the river? And past. The river's silted up, impassable. It's Caligo Morass now. And they have a new leader in this area, a powerful lich acting as the Grimnant's general. The Church of Sarah came to help, and there was a great battle only a few days ago, but the Cabal routed us. He pushed to his feet. I'll get some more wood for the fire. The young girl returned with the box that held the inn's store of healing herbs. This is all we have left. Most of our supply got used on the soldiers who stayed here. Flicking through the packets on impulse, Liliana asked her, Does anyone here remember the House of Ves? The girl paused to consider. There's ghost stories about the old ruined manor in the morass, about the undead son and the evil daughter who fled. No, Liliana held up a restraining hand. It was unsurprising the events of that day had become a local legend, but she had no interest in hearing it. That part I know. I mean the true history of the family. What happened to them afterward? No, not that I ever heard. The girl hefted the bucket of soiled water. I can ask around for you if you like. No, it's not important. Liliana gestured her away. As the girl left, she stared toward the shuttered windows, her brow furrowed. Gideon stirred a little, blinking up at her. What is it? She shook her head and glanced down at the herb packets. They don't have what I need, but it should grow nearby. I'll go find it. He sank back on the couch, wincing at the pain of movement. She put on a malicious smile for form's sake and added, Don't fear I'll abandon you. I don't fear that, he said, mildly, gazing up at her. You need me to kill Belzenlock. Liliana found herself with no reply, and, doubly irritated, left the inn. The land had changed so much, Liliana knew the herbs she wanted might no longer exist, but they were the fastest way to heal Gideon. They needed to come up with a plan and deal with Belzenlock as quickly as possible. Once past the ruins, she made her way into the marsh. She found the herbs on a surviving island of higher ground, and picked what she needed. She straightened up, looked off through a copse of moss-shrouded trees, and for a moment the strange landscape was familiar again. This was where she had first met the Raven Man. You tried to help Josu like this with these same herbs, she thought, the memory of that day unexpectedly clear. She had only meant to heal him, and instead turned him into a mindless undead monster that killed Lady Anna, killed her servants, and then she fled the plane as her spark ignited, leaving her mother and father, all her family and friends, everyone she had ever known, to their fates. The spell animating Josu must have broken when she left the plane, but she had never thought of what her family had made of the carnage in his room. They must have thought her dead, surely. Had they searched for her? Had they thought Josu had killed her? Wrapped up in her sudden new power as a planeswalker, trying to survive, she had refused to think about them since that day. It was so long ago, and the pain-filled memories were like a glimpse into the mind of a different person. Don't be stupid, she told herself. The House of Ves was now just a legend, a ghost story to amuse the town's children. They lived their lives, aged and died. Nothing would be left of the manor but a pile of rubble with no clues to discover. But she found herself walking, her feet finding the familiar path buried under all the mud and marsh grass. Inconvenient emotions getting in the way of her goal. Liliana made her way through a stand of grass as high as a sapling and stopped abruptly. It had to be her fevered imagination. The house was still there. The twisted trees and heavy vegetation had grown right up to the gray stone walls, but she could see the shape of the center wing, the curve of the nearest tower. This is madness, she thought. Madness or some strange power at work. The doors to the main hall stood open. It was surprisingly hard to make herself cross the open field and walk up the steps, but dread and the need to know drove her on. She stepped inside. The light from the doorway fell on the carved railings of the upper gallery, the tapestried hangings on the wall behind, and for an instant it was as if the house was wholly intact, just as it was. As if it had existed in a timeless bubble, preserved like an insect in amber. But then she breathed in the scent of blood and rot, and the moment broke. She blinked and saw the hangings were in tatters, the carving broken and scarred by weather, but still This whole house should be a ruin, she thought. Something has done this, deliberately. She could be brought here to see it? If so, it could be the Raven Man stalking her across the plains. But why? She followed the scent of blood farther into the hall. There, before the great hearth, symbols had been charred into the stone floor, their shape and pattern obscured by dried remnants of what must have been huge gouts of blood. Dozens of unlit candles surrounded the spot, their pools of melted wax further obscuring the traces left behind by some powerful necromantic spell. Cold air wafted up from the floor like an open grave. Liliana's jaw hurt, and she realized it was because her lips had been drawn back in an unconscious snarl. Whatever had happened here, it was no coincidence. Night had started to fall when Liliana reached the outskirts of town. She had barely started on the path through the ruins when she sensed the surge of undead malice. She muttered, "I do not have time for this," and started to run. She heard the fighting before she reached the plaza and rounded the last corner to see a battle ahead. The market stalls had been set afire and dark figures fought across the plaza, firelight glinting off flashing blades. The townspeople were easy to spot, wearing patched armor and wielding makeshift clubs and tools, as well as swords and battle axes. Some had fallen already, and the Aven she had seen on the rooftop lay sprawled dead on the paving stones, its wings a broken tangle. The attackers wore black armor with spikes and sharp points, as unlike the banalish white and silver and stained glass as possible. Undead knights from the Cabal, Liliana thought in disgust. There would be a Cabal cleric here somewhere, a living human cultist to control the mindless revenants. Gideon suddenly tumbled out of the shadows near the inn. He rolled to his feet and then staggered, clearly still weakened by his wounds. He wore no armor and blood stained his bandages and clothing, but he swung a borrowed sword as a knight on horseback bore down on him. The knight wore heavy black armor studded with sharp spikes and was mounted atop a large armored horse. No, as the creature tossed its head, Liliana spotted the rotting flesh and white bone through the gaps in its armor, the pits of darkness where its eyes should be. The knight wore no helmet, and his head was covered with pale, shrunken flesh, his hair a rotting white mane. Screams erupted from the inn as the doors burst open. Another undead knight dragged two struggling figures outside. Liliana recognized the young woman and the boy who had helped attend the room. Gideon flung himself toward them, and the knight on horseback drove his mount forward to ride him down. "Ha! You'll have to do better than this, Bells in Lock," Liliana thought as she raised her hands. She drew strength from the dead slumped on the cold pavement, from the bones buried in the ruins, from the rotting corpses in the marsh, from the ghost in the mist. As the etchings on her skin flared violet, bolts shot out from her hands to strike a dozen black-armored knights. She strode forward into the chaos of the battle. A revenant on foot charged her, and she spared one jester to send a black cloud shooting up from the ground. It wrapped his writhing form and rotted him to nothing as what was left of his armor hit the pavement. The undead knight barreled down on Gideon and lifted his lance for a killing blow. Liliana focused her will and set it into the black-armored form. In the next instant, he was hers. She made him drop the lance and turn his mount away from Gideon. She snapped the mount's connection to the power that animated it. As it collapsed into a pile of bones, the knight tumbled to the ground. She considered using him against the others, but the dozen or so she had already destroyed had turned the battle. Gideon gained his feet again and hacked away at the few combatants left near the inn. Shouting in triumph, the surviving townspeople regrouped to charge the others. Liliana lifted her hand to destroy the last knight, but something whispered in her mind. "The void awaits." Liliana froze, her heart pounding. Then her lips curled in contempt. It was a trick. The undead knight's master had to be the lich who had devastated Caligo for the Cabal, and the lich had to be the one behind the arcane preservation of Vest Manor. Liliana explored along the connection, curious. How could this lich know so much about her? Was it possibly... An image of the lich's face burned before her. The face was Josu's. "No!" Liliana's heart seized in her chest. "It can't be! No!" she shouted. Her rage and dismay snapped the connection. The knight's corpse exploded and armor and rotting bones flew across the plaza. The townspeople had caught the human cleric and pinned him to the ground with a spear to his chest. Liliana shouldered him to his side and grabbed him by the leg to drag into the firelight. Her voice rough with rage, she demanded, "Where is Josu? What has Belzenlock done with him?" Done to him. She was barely aware of Gideon moving to her side, watching her with concern. The cleric gasped a laugh and then choked out, "Ha ha! He knew our demon lord, the Scion of Darkness. He knew you were coming. He has made your precious brother into his servant, the commander of his unholy forces." "Josu serves Belzenluck?" Liliana repeated, shock making the words sound calm. The necromantic rite in Vest Manor had been used to turn Josu from mindless undead into a powerful lich, capable of using Josu's memories and military training, but enslaved to Belzenluck. "Belzenluck is using my own brother against me," Liliana thought, the brother whose soul she had made vulnerable with her first uncontrolled use of power. "He serves our lord. The cleric gurgled as blood filled his throat. "The void awaits," and slumped lifeless on the pavement. Liliana stared down at him, growing fury overriding the horror at what had happened to Josu. She would not allow this. Her brother would not be Belzenlock's slave. She would free him no matter what it took. "You'll pay for this, Belzenlock," she said, grating out the words in cold fury. "No matter what I have to do, you will pay." Well, and that's it for the magic story for today. There will actually be another magic story tomorrow. I'll do a video reading out that story as well. And remember, always keep it here at the RPL. We've got lots of great content coming up, including Magic the Gathering Arena streams and YouTube VODs. So, stay watching, Observer.